Ever since she was 5, her parents called her crazy. They forced pills down her throat to keep her quiet, locked her in her room while they told neighbors she was a danger to herself. All the while, they spent her inheritance on luxury cars and secret vacations. The world saw them as perfect parents saving a broken child. She saw prison bars on pastel walls, but on her 18th birthday, she vanished without a trace. 2 years later, the girl they buried in silence returned, smiling from the CEO's chair, watching her perfect parents drop to their knees. What would you do if your own parents poisoned your childhood just to steal your future? Comment below with your thoughts. Share your own story if you've faced toxic parents, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Emily Hart was born with the kind of inheritance that could have built an empire twice over. Her grandparents, old money with deep roots in the city's oldest banking circles, left her everything when they passed: trust funds, real estate, a legacy that could keep her safe forever. But nothing could keep her safe from her own parents. On the outside, the Harts were a picture of suburban perfection. A white columned mansion at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, manicured lawns, expensive cars lining the driveway, and Emily, sweet, shy, delicate Emily, kept behind drawn curtains. Neighbors would sometimes see her standing at the window, her small palm pressed against the glass, her eyes wide and empty. When they asked why she didn't go to school, her mother, Lillian, would shake her head sadly. "She's unwell," she'd whisper, voice trembling just enough for pity. "Emily has episodes. We do everything we can." No one questioned it. Not when Lillian and David Hart donated thousands to local charities, hosted church fundraisers, appeared in glossy magazines posing as the ideal philanthropic family. Behind closed doors, though, that pretty house smelled like locked medicine cabinets, muffled sobs, and broken dreams. Emily learned early that crying only made the pills stronger. At first, she resisted. She'd spit them out, hide them under her tongue. But they always found out. They always found a way to make her swallow them. By age 10, she was dosed 3 times a day with medication she didn't need, written by doctors who never even looked her in the eye. School was out of the question. "You can't be trusted around other children," her father snapped when she asked if she could go back. "What if you hurt someone, Emily? Do you want that on your conscience?" So she learned from the books she could steal from their shelves: old textbooks, outdated encyclopedias. At night, when the house went dark, she'd slip out of bed and listen through air vents and thin walls. That's how she first heard the word trust fund, how she first realized that her condition was a lie bought with her own money. At 15, she tried to run once, packed a tiny backpack, crept out barefoot. She didn't make it past the hedges before she felt her father's hand on the back of her neck. The next morning, she woke up strapped to her bed, wrists raw from leather cuffs, a new prescription bottle waiting on her nightstand. 3 more years passed like that. Days blurred into nights. Emily's mind sharpened through the fog of sedatives because she learned to pretend. She learned to smile when they checked on her, to nod obediently as she swallowed her pills, then spit them into the trash when no one was looking. She read. She planned. She waited. On her 18th birthday, her mother brought her a cake she couldn't eat and a card she couldn't read through the haze. "You know we love you, don't you?" Lillian said, smoothing Emily's hair back with cold fingers. "We only do this because we love you." Emily nodded. She always nodded. That night, she didn't flush her pills down the drain like usual. She hid them under her tongue, tucked them in the lining of her pillowcase. She waited until the house was silent, her father snoring, her mother's wineglass empty on the coffee table. Then she slipped out of bed one last time. She grabbed the emergency cash her parents kept for when she had episodes, quietly lifted the keys to her father's old sedan, and disappeared into the night. For 2 years, Emily Hart was a ghost. She changed her name, cut her hair, slept in motels, scrubbed floors, waited tables. Anything to stay hidden. But she did more than survive. She learned. She found ways to stretch every stolen dollar. She took online classes under fake names, read business books in greasy diner kitchens during night shifts, and wrote out plan after plan in stolen notebooks. Every dollar they stole from her would come back tenfold. Every lie they fed the world would taste like poison when she served it back to them. The world thought Emily Hart was crazy? Let them think so. She would be the last laugh they ever heard. When she finally stepped off that midnight bus back to her hometown, her name wasn't Emily anymore. It was Emma Hale, CEO, sole owner of a holding company that quietly owned half the debts her parents didn't even know they owed. The girl at the window was gone. The ghost had come home. Emily's breaking point didn't come with a scream. It came with a whisper through a bedroom vent, words that slipped between floorboards like poison. It was a rainy Thursday. She'd turned 17 the week before, but no one in the house mentioned it. Her mother had spent the whole afternoon on the phone, pacing the hallway while Emily lay curled up on her bed, staring at the ceiling. She hadn't taken her pills that day, hiding them in the torn lining of her old teddy bear. Her head felt clearer than it had in weeks, clear enough to hear every word through the thin plaster wall. "She's getting harder to control," her father's voice growled from the study below. "I caught her reading my files again. If she ever figures out the trust is gone—" "She won't," her mother snapped. "She's a lunatic. Everyone knows it. Who would believe her? They'll lock her up for real if she tries to talk." Emily's blood ran cold. Her heartbeat pulsed in her ears, drowning out the rest of their conversation. She had always suspected something, small pieces that never fit together until that moment. Her inheritance, the reason they never let her outside, the reason her medication kept changing. The truth was simple, vicious, and terrifying. She wasn't sick. They were thieves. Her parents, these toxic parents everyone thought were saints, had turned her life into a lie for money. That night, Emily didn't sleep. She lay in bed tracing the cracks in the ceiling with her eyes, counting the seconds between her father's heavy snores and the soft clink of her mother's wine glass downstairs. A storm rattled the windows. Rain dripped through the gutter outside like a ticking clock. By morning, her eyes were raw, but her mind was sharper than it had ever been. She started testing her chains. At breakfast, she asked her father about her trust fund, sweetly, innocently. He slapped her so hard she tasted blood. "Never speak of that again," he hissed, pointing a trembling finger in her face. Her mother pretended not to see the bruise forming on her cheek. For weeks, Emily played along. She swallowed every pill they handed her, then spat it out when they turned away. She smiled when they spoke to neighbors, nodded when they called her sensitive or special. She learned how to move without being seen, how to listen without breathing. She memorized account numbers when her father left paperwork on his desk. She watched how he scribbled his passwords on sticky notes and stuffed them in his wallet. She mapped every lie they'd ever told until her mind was a locked vault of their secrets. But the risk was growing. One night, 2 months after she first heard them whisper about the trust, her father found her standing outside his office door, barefoot and wide-eyed in the dark. He dragged her by her hair back to her room, pushed her face first into her mattress, and screamed that she was lucky they hadn't sent her away already. He stormed out, slammed the door, and locked it from the outside. Emily lay there for hours, her scalp stinging, her heartbeat calm. Lucky. She mouthed the word to the shadows on her bedroom wall. She wasn't lucky, but she was done being scared. The next morning, she forced herself to eat breakfast with them. Dry toast, burnt coffee. Her mother chatted about a charity gala they'd attend that weekend. Her father reminded her to behave if anyone asked how she was doing. Emily nodded, folding her hands neatly in her lap. Underneath the table, her nails dug into her skin so hard they left crescent moons. That night, she made her choice. She would run. But escape needed more than a slammed door and a dark street. She needed time. She needed cover. So she waited, playing her part perfectly while she built her plan piece by piece. A week later, she stole $50 from her father's wallet. The next week, she pocketed an extra set of car keys when no one was looking. She memorized bus routes she'd never been allowed to ride. At night, she'd press her ear to the floor, listening to them talk about that crazy girl upstairs while she smiled in the dark. Then, the final push. A doctor's appointment she was forced to attend. Her mother held her wrist tight in the waiting room, nails digging in. When the doctor asked how she felt, Emily turned her wide eyes to her mother's stiff smile, then lied through her teeth. "I'm feeling better," she said sweetly. "Much better." I think the pills are really working." Her mother squeezed her hand so hard her knuckles turned white. The doctor smiled, wrote another prescription, and signed a fresh note that said Emily should stay home, for her own good. Emily tucked the note into her pocket like a death sentence she'd already torn apart in her mind. That night, she didn't just hide her pills. She hid clothes, cash, the spare keys. She packed them under loose floorboards beneath her bed. For days, she rehearsed every step, when to move, how to silence the old creaky stair, when to slip out the door without setting off the alarm. She practiced holding her breath for minutes at a time so she could stand still when her father did his midnight checks. And then, on the first night of her 18th year, when the cake candles flickered out and her parents clinked their wine glasses to celebrate another year of surviving our crazy child, Emily made her move. She lay in bed until their laughter turned to snores. She slipped on her oldest sneakers. She picked up the bag she'd hidden beneath the floor. She paused at her bedroom door, hand on the knob, heart pounding in her chest like it wanted out. Then she opened it, stepped into the hallway, and didn't look back. Outside, the rain soaked her hair flat against her neck. She climbed into the old sedan, her father's pride, and turned the key with trembling fingers. When the engine growled to life, she felt her first taste of real power, of freedom, of revenge waiting to bloom. Emily Hart, the crazy girl in the attic, was gone. In her place was someone her toxic parents could never cage again. Emily didn't become Emma Hale overnight. She learned quickly that freedom wasn't safety, at least not yet. The first week away from the house, she slept in the back seat of the stolen sedan, parking behind dusty gas stations or abandoned lots on the edge of town. She survived on stale vending machine crackers and cheap coffee, clutching her father's old coat around her shoulders when the nights turned too cold. But every shiver, every rumble in her stomach fueled her resolve. She hadn't run just to hide. She'd run to build a life that would bury her toxic parents in the very lies they'd fed her. In the beginning, her plan was simple: survive. She dyed her hair dark brown in a truck stop bathroom, chopping the long strands herself with rusty scissors. She tossed her old clothes in a dumpster and found cheap secondhand jeans at a thrift store. Emily Hart died there under flickering fluorescent lights and the hum of broken air vents. Emma Hale walked out instead, her new name stitched from the ashes of the old one. Emma's first months were brutal. She washed dishes in diners, mopped floors at motels, took the worst shifts no one else wanted. She kept her head down, her ears open. Every paycheck, she squirreled away a few dollars. She didn't care about comfort. She cared about the day she'd use every cent to strike back. One night, while scrubbing burnt grease off a diner grill at 2 a.m., she overheard a busboy complaining about online classes. "Ain't worth it," he groaned, tossing his apron on a hook. But Emma's ears perked up. That night, huddled in the back booth with a cheap second-hand phone, she found a free Wi-Fi signal and signed up for business courses using a fake name and address. Every spare moment she wasn't working, she was learning. Marketing, accounting, contracts, the very words her father used like weapons behind that locked study door now became hers to wield. While her parents slept in silk sheets bought with her stolen trust, Emma balanced diner shifts with late-night textbooks and crumpled notepads filled with furious scribbles. The more she learned, the more she realized just how deep her parents' fraud ran. She found online public records, property deeds, business loans, hidden debts. She recognized her father's name tied to shell companies she never knew existed. Each discovery lit a new fuse inside her. The money they'd stolen wasn't safe. It was leveraged, spent, buried under layers of fake smiles and bank statements waiting to collapse. She wasn't alone forever, either. At one motel, she met Carmen, an exhausted single mom working the night desk who offered Emma leftover coffee and a place to sit when the rain got too heavy. Carmen never asked questions Emma couldn't answer. She just nodded when Emma said she needed to start over. One night, Carmen slipped her a library card and pointed her to an old public library where no one asked for ID if you looked desperate enough. In that library, Emma found her real sanctuary. She used free computers to build her new name on paper, registering for a tax ID, opening an online bank account with a mail drop address. She learned how to file paperwork for a small business. She watched tutorial after tutorial until her eyes burned. Bit by bit, the girl they called crazy built the bones of her empire on borrowed Wi-Fi and determination alone. She started small, odd freelance jobs, then small online gigs that paid just enough to prove she was real. She found loopholes to protect her identity, masked addresses, digital wallets that left no trail back to Emily Hart. Every time she saw her fake name attached to a payment confirmation, it was a reminder. She was no ghost. She was becoming a weapon. By the time Emma turned 20, she'd saved enough to rent a tiny studio in a rundown building above a pawn shop. It was drafty, smelled like stale beer from the bar downstairs, but it had a door that locked and windows that opened. She painted the walls herself, second-hand roller in hand, scrubbing away memories of the pink floral wallpaper in her childhood prison. She tacked a single note above her makeshift desk. Make them pay. It was the first thing she saw every morning and the last thing she whispered before sleeping on her lumpy mattress every night. Emma Hale was far from finished, but her plan was alive, and for the first time, so was she. Emma Hale's first real taste of revenge came in the form of a single number on a screen, an overdue notice for a loan she didn't even know her father had taken out. While scrolling public records late one night, Emma stumbled across a property tied to one of her father's shell companies. It was supposed to be an investment condo, but it was underwater, 3 payments behind, foreclosure looming. That was her opening. Using her new business as cover, she found a way to buy the debt at a fraction of its value through a broker who never even asked her real name. It was a small victory, but it tasted better than any meal she'd eaten in those hungry years. She sat alone in her studio, the notice printed on cheap paper, and laughed until her ribs hurt. The girl they called crazy now owned the chain tightening around her father's throat. Once she cracked the door, Emma kicked it wide open. Over the next year, she dug deeper, finding liens, unpaid taxes, quiet lawsuits buried under new company names. Her parents had built their kingdom on a rotting foundation, patching the cracks with charm and forged signatures, and now their daughter, the daughter they drugged, locked away, and labeled insane, was the one yanking out every brick. She built her holdings company to swallow every scrap they'd carelessly left exposed. Sometimes she'd slip into small investor meetings under her alias, quiet in the back row, just to watch her father shake hands with men who didn't realize their new silent partner was his worst nightmare in lipstick and a second-hand blazer. The first time her father got the call, "Sir, there's been a change in your loan ownership." Emma imagined his face, the confusion, the rising panic, but he wouldn't know it was her. Not yet. She didn't want them to see the dagger. She wanted them to feel it twist. As months passed, the pressure mounted. She made deals in secret, flipping debts into leverage. When she bought out one of her father's shady partners, she made sure the paperwork landed on his desk on his birthday, signed with the corporate alias she'd crafted so carefully it couldn't be traced back to Emily Hart. At first, her parents scrambled to plug the leaks. They sold off cars, downsized staff, moved money around. But their empire was too bloated to patch overnight. For every hole they sealed, Emma opened 3 more, and every new paper trail she forced them to sign, every frantic phone call they made to lawyers and accountants, pulled them deeper into the quicksand she'd poured for them. One night, Emma stood in the shadows across the street from her childhood home. The mansion's perfect lights glowed against the night, the same windows that had once caged her. Now, they hid 2 desperate people drowning in secrets they couldn't contain. She watched her father pace the front hallway, phone pressed to his ear, shoulders hunched like a man being hunted. Her mother sat stiffly on the couch, face pale, eyes darting toward the window as if she could sense the ghost they'd created standing just beyond the hedges. Emma didn't knock. She didn't need to. They would come to her soon enough. Back in her rented office, Emma pinned every new debt notice, foreclosure threat, and frozen asset on a corkboard behind her desk. Each pin was a nail in the coffin they'd hammered shut around her childhood. And soon, she'd bury them in it, alive. Her company grew quietly, feeding off every weakness they exposed. Small investors trusted her calm, unassuming presence. No one asked how a young woman with no family name had such a sharp eye for bad debt. They never saw the battered girl behind the polished smile. They only saw results, and Emma delivered them in spades. One final piece remained, proof of the original betrayal. The missing trust fund, the fake prescriptions, the hush money. Emma had learned enough to know exactly where her father would hide the oldest secrets, deep in the vaults of a bank that had once called her grandfather friend. Getting them would take more than a forged signature or a hidden alias. It would take stepping back into the world her parents thought they'd erased her from forever. And Emma was ready. Can you feel it? Justice is closing in on those toxic parents who thought they'd buried her for good. What would you do if you had the power to make them beg? Drop your thoughts below, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe. Emma's revenge has only just begun. Emma Hale had been patient for years, but revenge demanded more than patience. It demanded precision. She had spent months collecting every scrap of proof her toxic parents thought they'd buried forever. Fake medical records, trust fund withdrawal slips, email chains between her father and corrupt doctors willing to label a healthy girl as unstable for the right price. Each piece of evidence was like striking a match in a dark room. Suddenly, the shadows that haunted her childhood were clear and flammable, but paper alone wasn't enough. If she wanted the world to believe her, if she wanted them to crumble in front of everyone who'd ever praised their good parenting, she needed an audience. So she called the family lawyer first, the same slick man who had patted her head when she was a little girl and whispered to her father about protecting the estate. She requested a formal family meeting, an urgent discussion about the trust with all the extended relatives who'd stood by, blind to her misery, dazzled by fancy dinners and polite lies. At first, the lawyer stammered, tried to brush her off. But when Emma slid copies of suspicious transactions across the table, documents with his signature in the corner, he swallowed hard and nodded. "Of course, Miss Hale. I'll make the arrangements." 2 weeks later, the date was set. One Sunday afternoon, the Hart family would gather at the old estate, the same house where Emily had once pressed her hand to a locked window, dreaming of freedom. Now she'd walk back in through the front door, no longer the ghost child, but the woman holding the leash. Emma didn't show her hand all at once. She hired a private investigator to dig up every last detail her parents couldn't scrub clean. Hidden offshore accounts, hush payments to doctors, backroom deals that turned her childhood into profit. She stacked it all into neat folders, each one labeled like a death sentence. Then she rehearsed what she would say. Not a tear. No shaking voice. No more cowering under her father's shadow. This time, they would tremble. The night before the meeting, Emma stood outside the estate again. The windows glowed warm yellow, but she knew the people inside were cold to the bone. She imagined her father pacing that same hallway, barking orders to lawyers, yelling at her mother to act normal. She pictured her mother sitting at the vanity, dabbing expensive powder over new worry lines, wondering if they'd finally gone too far. In her car, Emma spread the folders across the passenger seat. Bank statements, medical reports, letters of guardianship forged when she was just a child. She ran her fingers over the paper edges, breathing in the weight of her own history. For the first time, the fear felt small, like a faint echo instead of a scream in her chest. She sent her final email to the lawyer confirming her arrival. Then she turned her phone off. No distractions. No last-minute second thoughts. At dawn, Emma slipped on the suit she'd bought for this day alone. Black, tailored, sharp enough to cut through every polite lie they'd ever spun. She tied her hair back, revealing the face they'd hidden for so long. No more shadows. No more child at the window. Just the woman who would break the lock for good. The plan was simple. Lay out the truth where the whole family could see it. Every forged signature, every stolen scent, every prescription that poisoned her for years. And when the begging began, when her parents' perfect life shattered at their feet, she wouldn't raise her voice. She wouldn't lift a finger. They would do it to themselves. Tomorrow, the girl they called crazy would burn their lies to the ground. The grand room was exactly as Emma remembered it. High ceilings, heavy curtains, a polished table that stretched longer than any real family bond ever had in that house. The Hart relatives gathered in clusters, murmuring politely, clutching coffee cups and polite smiles. Most hadn't seen little Emily in years. A few whispered about her new name, Emma Hale, lips pursed, eyes darting toward the tall figure standing alone at the head of the table. When her parents entered, the room quieted like someone had sucked the air out of it. Her father's hair had thinned, his suit hung a little looser, but his eyes still carried that same icy command. Her mother followed close behind, brittle smile glued in place, pearl necklace trembling slightly against her collarbone. They hadn't seen her yet. Not truly. Not the woman she'd become. When her father's gaze finally landed on her, Emma's hair pulled back, shoulders squared, the folders stacked neatly in front of her, he paused mid-step. Just for a second. But she caught it. That flicker of fear. The family lawyer cleared his throat, fumbling with his papers. Thank you all for coming today. Miss Hale, Emma, has called this meeting to address some urgent matters regarding the family trust and certain financial discrepancies. Emma didn't stand right away. She let the tension stretch thin enough to hum in the air. Then she rose, lifted the first folder, and slid it down the table toward her father. He didn't reach for it. Go ahead, Dad, she said calmly, her voice steady as glass. Open it. Show everyone how you protected your daughter. Silence. Her mother shifted in her seat, eyes darting from the folder to the faces of cousins and aunts who'd once cooed about sweet Emily's condition. Emma flipped the folder open herself. Copies of forged medical prescriptions fanned out like cards at a poker table. Doctor's notes labeling her unstable, a danger to herself, unfit for schooling. Her father's signature at the bottom of every consent form. A cousin gasped. An uncle leaned forward, squinting at the papers like they might catch fire. You told them I was crazy, Emma said, her voice louder now, filling the room. You told them I couldn't handle my own inheritance. You stole every dollar my grandparents left for me, and you drugged me so I wouldn't fight back. Her father slammed his palm on the table, the crack echoing off the walls. This is slander. She's lying. Emma pulled the second folder open. Bank transfers, fake companies, offshore accounts, receipts that traced her stolen childhood to the cars they drove, the parties they threw, the lie they lived. Does this look like a lie? She asked quietly, turning to the rest of the room. She didn't plead. She didn't cry. She just pointed, cold, precise. Every signature here is his. Every cent that paid for those charity galas. That came from a little girl they locked in a room for 15 years. Her mother let out a strangled whisper. Emily, please. It's Emma now, she cut in, her voice like a blade. Emily died the night I ran. The night you made me choose between your cage and my own survival. Aunt Linda, who'd once called her poor, fragile Emily, stared at her parents like they were strangers. Murmurs rose around the table, some disgusted, some shocked, some angry at the sudden realization that their perfect family name was about to rot in public. Her father looked ready to lunge across the table, but the lawyer spoke first, weak, trembling, eyes fixed on the mountain of evidence. Mr. Hart, is this true? He didn't answer. He couldn't. His mouth worked, but no sound came out. Emma leaned forward, resting her hands on the polished table that once served as her prison's throne. I'm taking back everything you stole. The trust, the assets, the house, and when I'm done, the authorities will have copies of every forged prescription, every fraudulent withdrawal. You won't just lose the money. You'll answer for the years you branded your own daughter insane. No one clapped. No one cheered. The silence was enough. Her father's shoulders slumped. His mother's head dropped. The room closing in like a coffin made of marble and shame. The same house that kept her captive would bury their reputation forever. And Emma, once the ghost at the window, stood tall in the wreckage, watching them drown in the truth they thought would stay hidden forever. When the final papers were signed, Emma didn't stay to watch her parents pack up the life they'd stolen. She didn't need to see her father's cufflinks dropped in a cardboard box or her mother's pearls tucked away for some auction that wouldn't cover half their legal fees. She'd seen enough of their tears to last her 2 lifetimes. What mattered now was that the mansion, the prison where she'd learned the taste of silence, was hers again. But Emma didn't linger there either. The curtains were ripped down, the locks changed, the accounts frozen and emptied back into her name where they'd always belonged. She walked through each empty room one last time, fingertips grazing the banister she'd clung to as a child. the window where she'd pressed her palm, hoping someone, anyone, might see her. No one had come then, so she'd come for herself. When her parents begged, when her mother knelt on the polished marble begging for just a chance to explain, Emma didn't scream. She didn't spit cruel words or slap her mother the way her father had slapped her for asking questions all those years ago. She simply stood there, her lawyer at her side, and told them, clear as daylight, "You do not exist to me anymore." Then she turned and left them kneeling. Let the echo of their own desperate voices ring in the empty halls they once guarded so fiercely. Outside, the air smelled like rain, same as the night she'd first escaped. But this time, she didn't have to run. The gates swung open not for a prisoner, but for an owner. Her shoes clicked against the driveway where her father's expensive cars used to gleam. Now, only gravel and memories remained. News traveled fast in circles that once whispered about poor, crazy Emily. Within weeks, the same distant relatives who had looked away all those years now called her brave, inspiring, a survivor. But Emma didn't care for pity or praise. She didn't answer their calls. She knew which smiles had stayed silent while she rotted in a locked room. Her parents faced more than just public shame. The courts came next: fraud, medical malpractice, misappropriation of a trust fund that should have secured their daughter's future instead of funding their empty, toxic empire. She didn't have to watch the trial. The verdict was already written the moment she laid those files on the table. Fines, seized accounts, a name no charity would touch, no neighbor would trust. They had built their power on her silence, and she had ripped the foundation out from under them with her voice. Emma could have stayed. She could have stripped the house for profit, hosted parties in the same rooms where she'd learned to fear her own name. But revenge wasn't about lingering in ruins. She didn't want the house. She didn't want their ghosts. She wanted freedom, real freedom. The kind that didn't rattle chains in her mind every time she heard her mother's perfume or her father's measured footsteps. So she locked the front door for the last time, handed the keys to a demolition crew, and walked away as the machines moved in to crush every gilded lie under steel jaws. The mansion that once hid her suffering would hide nothing ever again. For the first time in her life, Emma Hale didn't need a window to look through. She had doors. She had choices. She had a future they could never poison again. And behind her, the world finally saw her toxic parents for what they truly were: frauds, abusers, nothing more than two small people exposed by the daughter they tried so hard to bury. Emma Hale didn't celebrate her victory with champagne or headlines. She didn't stand on the rubble of her family's crumbling estate and declare herself Queen of the Ashes. She chose something quieter, something that belonged only to her. A month after the mansion fell, she moved into a small cottage on the edge of town, far from the suffocating marble halls and iron gates of her childhood prison. The cottage was nothing grand: 2 bedrooms, creaky floorboards, windows that stuck on humid mornings. But it was hers. Every corner smelled of paint she'd rolled on herself. Every squeaky step reminded her she could come and go as she pleased. She didn't disappear into solitude, though. She knew too well what silence could do to a person. She turned her phone back on, not to answer the nosy relatives, but to talk to people who needed her story more than they'd ever need her old family's name. She set up a foundation in the name she'd chosen for herself, the Hale Foundation. Its mission was simple: help children and teens escape abusive, toxic households that no one else would dare to look behind. For every kid branded troubled, when the trouble was really in the mirror of their parents' lies, Emma made sure there was a lawyer ready to fight, a safe place to sleep, a chance to learn how to live without fear. Some nights she stayed up late, replying to emails from kids she'd never meet in person, messages that broke her heart and rebuilt it in the same breath. "How did you do it?" they asked. "How did you escape? How did you stay strong when everyone told you were the problem?" She told them the truth, that she hadn't always felt strong, that some nights she'd curled up in the back seat of that old stolen sedan, crying so hard she thought her lungs would split, that she'd nearly turned back more times than she could count, but she'd kept a small flame alive, one stubborn piece inside her that whispered, "They don't get to define you." When local reporters asked for interviews, Emma said yes, but only once. She sat on the steps of the community center funded by the Hale Foundation, sunlight in her hair, the echo of her father's threats far behind her now. She told the story as it really was, not a fairy tale of revenge, but a raw testament to survival. How easy it was for people to look away when abuse wore pearls and donated to charity. How vital it was to believe the quiet child who said, "I'm not crazy, I'm trapped." The interview went viral, but Emma didn't chase more cameras. She had work to do. She hired staff, people who understood kids who flinched at slammed doors and sudden footsteps. She kept her door open, always. If a teenager showed up at her office trembling with bruises on their arms and secrets on their tongue, she sat with them, no judgment in her eyes, and told them they weren't alone. On weekends, she tended a tiny vegetable garden behind her cottage. Her therapist's idea, though Emma secretly liked the dirt under her nails, the patient reminder that things grow where they're nurtured, not locked away. She sometimes stood there in the early morning, watching the sun catch dew on green leaves, thinking of the girl she'd been. The girl at the window, the girl who'd run barefoot through the rain, carrying nothing but her name. That girl wasn't gone. She'd simply grown roots. When people asked her what forgiveness looked like, Emma didn't lie. She hadn't forgiven her parents. She didn't plan to. Some wounds weren't owed mercy. They were owed truth. And she'd given the truth, raw and bright enough to light up every hidden room they'd locked her in. But she'd forgiven herself for staying too long, for being afraid, for not speaking sooner. That was the forgiveness that mattered. And when she closed her eyes at night, no locks on her door, no footsteps in the hall, Emma Hale knew one thing for certain. She wasn't just the daughter of toxic parents anymore. She was proof that sometimes surviving is the loudest revenge of all.